com, and we want to welcome all the media that's out there taking the program and feeding it to other sites. We are here in Flint, and the electricity and the atmosphere here is as electric as it is all over the state. Today is a state. Today is a date in which the state declares is number one standing as the number one football school in the college level, and we are going to win the championship tonight. If we don't, I'll have to crawl out of town because I've been I've been going to all the places wearing my hat, and tomorrow I'm going to be going back to these establishments today because I didn't get the respect that I think I deserve by wearing my U of M hat. And after the game tonight, I'm going to go back to those same places and demand some respect. John, are you gonna be watching that game tonight?
No, actually, I'll probably be doing other things. I think I've heard it's probably gonna be a good game.
Yeah,
I gather. Yeah,
we're favored by 4 points, and this shows you that the people that put the ratings together know exactly what they're doing. There was a lot of debate going on about the politics of the selection of the Final Four teams. There were a lot of persons that were saying that Florida State, that was undefeated this year as far as the regular season, they were saying, how do you in fact have Alabama in there, and they had lost one game early in the season, and the team that had a perfect record is not in the Final Four, and they were saying that politics played a role in it. And I was arguing that Alabama was number 8 before they played Georgia. And when they knocked Georgia off, and that how do you, in fact, put Georgia in there and put them, say they'll be number 4 since they lost the SEC game to Alabama. How do you put Georgia in there and then Alabama beat them? How do you put them in the Final Four at the end of the season? And a lot of persons were arguing about that Alabama didn't deserve to be there, but it was a matter of politics that they were placed in there. And you can't say that politics plays no role in it, but there is a track record that Lou Saban has over the course of his career at Alabama. And you cannot, and plus it's a monetary thing as well. Who's going to draw in terms of the crowd watching the game, because it is also commercial. I will make this point. This is not my topic for today, but I will make this point on the QT and running. It does not mean that there are not politics involved in it. If Deion Sanders, for example, who eventually took the job at Colorado, the Buffalo, Colorado Buffaloes, if he had taken that job at Florida, which he had applied for but didn't get it, if he had been the coach there and they were 12-0 and had been undefeated, it would be impossible politically to deny him and his team to go to the Final Four. It just could not have been done. They've been claiming all over the place because they're already making accusations about racism, and when there is no racism. And if that had happened and he had been the coach of their team, they could not have avoided it. But my point is that there is some politics that's involved in it. But they made the right selection because, I know we don't have, I don't think our audience is too much into this sports, world. But I have to say something because I want to do some bragging about the fact that U of M finally, has arrived here at the precipice of being crowned the national champions. We're favored by 4 points tonight in the game. And it's interesting that we have the number 1 team and number 2 team playing out as it was in the poll, and they are in the final game to determine who the champions are going to be. And the odds makers are making this a very close game, less than a touchdown difference between the two teams, a field goal plus a point margin between the two, with U of M favoring. So that's the electricity and atmosphere here, and you can feel it all over the city. And you go to other parts of the state, it's like electric. There's a lot of expectation here, and I know where I'm going to be. I don't watch pro football anymore. You start kneeling on me, and I got to see you down there kneeling. You do that, you can forget it. I stopped. I'm not a fan anymore. But in college, where there's more control over the players, and I know some of the coaches have said that if you kneel here, you sitting down, and everybody wants to play. So they have not gotten to that level of stupidity at the college level, and so that's what I watch, and I'm looking forward to the game tonight. I already got my menu all planned out. I had pizza last weekend, but I can't do pizza again. Too much bread, so I'm getting too fat. I have what they call in Africa when I go to some of these African countries, they tell me I have an American stomach. So I got to watch the bread, the bread intake. So I'm not eating pizza today. I got another menu. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I got another menu already planned. You can tell I'm a coupon guy because it's buy one get one free. It's gonna be 2 sandwiches in my pop, and maybe I don't think I should be eating any potato chips, but maybe it's something as a side dish. But the most famous of the sandwiches, I'll put it that way. Let you figure out which one I'm talking about. But I'm not talking about McDonald's. I can tell you that. This is a big day, and the atmosphere is charged, and there are a lot of expectations. Harbaugh don't let us down. We might be talking about tar and feathers. This is probably more serious here in the state today than it was when they walked around in the early parts of this country's history, and they're talking about taxation. And it had gotten so bad that when the tax persons showed up, the revenuers they call them showed up, they risked being tarred and feathered because people were not buying that. Revolutionary time period didn't stop when they were fighting against the British. They carried that into the transition period between that time period and setting up the Constitution of the United States. And if you talked about taxation, you had a problem on your hand. It's like that now. Harbaugh has got to win that game. We got tremendous chemistry in the atmosphere, and they're looking for him to come out to win the number one station in college football today. I think the game starts at let's see, they're going to probably start at 8 o'clock, 8:15, somewhere around there. And I'm just so assured we're going to prevail. Otherwise, I can't show my face until things die down. Okay, let me get to my topic for the day because I do want to say a few things here. And I think this would mimic a lot of what I wrote about today on Facebook. You got to read that post today because I can tell you that nobody's saying, nobody in this country is saying what I said today on the Facebook post. Because what the topic of the day is the unconstitutional additions to the Constitution. And nobody is going to make that claim that there are some things that are placed in the Constitution as amendments that in and of themselves, although added to the Constitution through the 4 ways in which the Constitution can be amended, there are 4 different processes that you can do the amendment through. Only 2 of them we've used, but we've only used the one of the 2 one time, and that was with the repeal of the 18th Amendment by the 21st Amendment, and we used a different process there for political reasons, and we repealed the prohibition. Nobody was going to stop drinking, and Al Capone was happy with the fact that they had prohibition because he can then do the things that were illegal. And of course, when you start doing things illegal and denying the revenuers, the tax agents, the tax structure is now being avoided. That's a problem. And so it wasn't religion, it wasn't temperance, any of that brought about a change in the attitude. It was the fact that there was revenue being lost, and they decided that if you cannot stop them, then join them, and then tax it, and so on. And that's the repeal and the temperance movement. But they did a different process in terms of the repeal of the 18th Amendment, the Prohibition Amendment, because you throw that hot potato in the state legislatures, you put it in their lap, they're not going to appreciate that, because you're throwing that monkey wrench in their wheelhouse and putting them behind the 8 ball and setting them up for jeopardy in the elections by the strong temperance lobby, and that could be a problem. So then the 21st Amendment is the only amendment that's been ratified and added to the Constitution through a different process. The main process of amending the Constitution is that you have 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate will make a propose an amendment to the Constitution. They cannot, in fact, ratify it in the House and the Senate. Although the proposal is made by the representatives of the states, but they cannot, as representatives of the states in Congress, ratify the document. It has to go to the states and the state legislatures. That one of the ways in which it takes place is through the state legislatures, and we've had every amendment added to the Constitution through that process except one. And 2/3 of the members of the House and 2/3 of the members of the Senate will, in fact, make the proposal. And then after the proposal is made, you see the states involved here, states' rights involved here, all you persons hollering at states' rights advocates and things of that sort. That's the way that's the system that is set up, where you have the states in charge of the process, as the states are involved in the election of the President of the United States. The president elected by the states, by the way, not by the popular vote in the states. The states elect the president in this country. And so those of you talking about, you're so tired of the Electoral College, and you're so tired of this, you're so tired of that, and all these other persons been brainwashed by these politicians trying to act like this was a intended democracy. And the word democracy is not mentioned in a single one of the documents of this country, not in the Declaration of Independence, not in the Bill of Rights, and not in the Constitution of the United States, not mentioned a single time in any of those documents. And those that are talking about our democracy, I call, this is something that I'm doing. I'm doing a series of just one after another, different aspects of the real way in this country was intended to function and operate by the founding fathers, to bring that back to center stage. We begin to get back on track here. And all the articles I'm going to be writing will have something to do with that, no matter how peripheral it is. It'll have something to do with that all the way up until November the 5th of this year, when we have the next election, which I think is the most critical election this country has had. Let's see, really in this country's history. This is the most critical election this country has had in this country's history. It was not critical. It wasn't really critical at the beginning, because everybody knew that the greatest president this country would ever have, George Washington. Everyone knew George Washington was going to be the first president of the United States. So that was a done deal. And so that election was not a critical election, because the country was unanimous behind George Washington, because George Washington was giving his flowers while he still lived. They knew what they had in George Washington. There's no president that comes close to touching his mantle, touching his coat. And that election was not a critical election, because the unanimity of the American people behind him. The 10 states that voted and sent electoral votes in that first election in 1789, those 10 states of the 13 states that were there at that time all 10 of those states voted unanimously with the electoral votes for George Washington, the great George Washington the Great. In the succeeding election in 1792, one election in 1789, and then in 1792, in the next election, there were 16 states at that point, and George Washington had received all 163 electoral votes. 69 electoral votes in 1789, 163 electoral votes in 1792. And why such a wide disparity? Because all 16 states that were in the Union at that point would in fact have their balloting counted from all 16 states. Only 10 of them were counted in the first electoral vote for the President of the United States. But George Washington received all of them in both on both the 1789 occasion and also in the 1792 occasion. The only president that's been elected twice by unanimous verdict, and really the only president that's ever been elected by a unanimous electoral vote, because Monroe, in the era of good feeling, 1816, I would say, to 1825, the era of good feeling, Monroe, the fifth president of the United States, it came in after Madison, the fourth president, the father of the Constitution, the fourth president. Monroe comes in, and most persons wanted to, they felt very good about Monroe's administration. You know, the Monroe Doctrine and so on and so forth, and some of the imperialistic aspects of that. And they felt the thing of from sea to shining sea and God bless America, you know, all these things that will fall therein from that time period that we don't have any connection to it because we don't know the grounding points of it. But there was an era of good feeling for about 8 years in the country during the Monroe period. And there was one unfaithful voter who didn't think that Monroe, as popular as he was, should stand in the same light as George Washington. So one of the voters decided to cast his vote, not that he was against James Monroe, but he didn't think that anyone should stand in the same space as the great George Washington, and cast his one vote for someone else. Monroe got all of the other electoral votes, but not get one of those electoral votes for that reason. That's the kind of standing that George Washington had up until that time, although Washington had died in 1799, was born in 1732 and died in 1799, 67 years old when he died. The great George Washington, the glue of the nation. Okay, so that being said, that gives you a grounding point of where we're going with this discussion today, because I want to talk about the Constitution a little bit more exhaustively than I've done in the past, to make some points that nobody else is making, to not just emote and say that there's no constitutional scholar in this country that have my credentials, which they don't. And none of them, the article I wrote today, I had to challenge some people on that post, and they're not going to come behind me and say anything. They will remain silent. They're not qualified, although a number of controversial points were in fact made. They're not qualified to come behind those points were made and make any counterpoint that would counter the points that were made in that article on Facebook. I suggest you read it. I can tell you they're reading it. The scholars are. But they won't acknowledge that, and they certainly don't come out publicly and say anything against it, because they're not going to be able to do that. Because what I'm noticing here, and I'm just now finding this out. I couldn't figure out a lot of reasons why they were saying the things they're saying, but I had to understand that they're not trained constitutional scholars. What they are is that they're trained lawyers. That's Alan Dershowitz, that's Lawrence Tribe, that's Jonathan Turley, and the rest of them. These are trained lawyers. They're not trained constitutional scholars. and they make the mistakes they make because their training is different from this training, and they make a lot of errors that if you are trained in this area, you can see that they're navigating in the wrong direction and are mystified by a lot of different uh, key aspects and nuances in the Constitution. That if you're not trained, you will in fact overlook some of the things that are written there, and I think that's also a problem of members of the Supreme Court. How 5 can see it this way and 4 can see it a different way in reading the same document. And it's not that they are purposely they're purposely misreading the document. Some of it, of course, is politics, but a lot of it is the fact that they just because you have you're lawyers. I mean, pretty much the Supreme Court is made up of lawyers, and I don't think lawyers. I look at lawyers as politicians primarily, and so we have politicians on the court trying to pretend they're non-partial. They very seldom have had a non-partial standing, which accounts for the sparsity of 9 old verdicts on the Supreme Court, members of the court looking at the same language and coming with different conclusions about what it means when the language is written in black and white, but they're reading it through a colored lens. And the prism through which they see the Constitution comes out of whether they are on this side or that side, and they're making interpretations based upon their own political ends, trying to act like they're not that. They're not acting in partisan ways. I would love to see us do that, but we have not arrived there yet because we don't have maturity. We don't have fealty to the Constitution. We swear to uphold it, but that becomes a practical impossibility if you're swearing to uphold the document. And number one, you don't understand the document you're swearing to uphold, and number two, you have a partisan view of what the document is saying. You're reading it through a prism that is colored by your bias. A lot of that goes on. So I decided today to come to the studio and continue what I wrote in my Facebook post, and I'm titling this talk today, the unconstitutional additions to the Constitution of the United States. And I pointed out specifically amendments 16 and 17 and section 3 of Amendment 14. And my argument, is this an argument? Can I say this is an argument? My stand, my position, put it that way, my position based upon what the Constitution's intent is that those provisions in the Constitution added to the Constitution, the 16th and 17th Amendment added in the 16th and 17th Amendment added in 1913, and Amendment 14, which has in it this provision that I was talking about right now, Section 3, which was added to the Constitution in 1870. Hold on. 1868. The 15th Amendment is added in 1870. So the 14th Amendment added in 1868. And the Civil Rights Amendments, they call them 13, 14, and 15. You have the 13th Amendment ratified in 1865. The 14th Amendment, 1868, and the 15th Amendment, 1870. Now we got it right. I'm saying that that there are things placed in the Constitution, and there's no scholar going along with me with on this point. I wonder if there's a single scholar that will go along with me on this point. That there are some things in the Constitution of the United States, added to it through the amendment process. They went through the procedure laid out in Article 5 of the original Constitution, that it went through the process of either a ratification through 3/4 of the state legislatures. Don't forget, I said now that every one of the amendments, we got 27 amendments, every one of the amendments has been ratified through a single process except one. And so the 27 amendments, 26 of them had been added to the Constitution by the process of 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate making the proposal, submitting the proposal to the states, and then 3/4 of the state legislatures ratifying the proposal sent to them by the states. Every amendment except one has been added to the Constitution through that process. The only amendment different from that is Amendment 21. Okay, so the process there would be different. And that would be ratified by 3/4 of state conventions. Where it's turned over to, if the people decide what politician is put in jeopardy by that process, if the people themselves make the vote, it doesn't put any of the politicians in jeopardy if they go for it, because the temperance lobby is so powerful that if they in fact had done that, like that the politicians are advocating drunkenness, people falling in alleys, people dying from being over intoxicated. They're carrying that baggage, and what the proposal does, it says that it would be ratified by a different process than the others that have been ratified prior to that. And I'm telling you what the politics were in back of it. The temperance movement was just that strong at that point. So it says in the proposal that the ratification would come through, and it tells you what the process would be for the ratification. There are four different ways in which you add amendments to the Constitution of the United States. You can go and read that in Article 5 of the Constitution, the amendment process. And so, and then framers, and that's another thing that gets me to have so much respect for the framers, how they figured out a way that if the people are being stymied by the elected officials who will not propose what needs to be proposed based upon their desires through the elected officials, they can just route around them and call a convention where the people can go around the elected officials in Washington and have their own convention and make a proposal there by 2/3 in the convention to make the proposal, where that you can go around the Congress and then have 3/4 of the state conventions to ratify the document. So that would be different ways of bringing the documents to amend the document to what the people want. It wouldn't be into the stuff that's going on right now. You may be aware of it, that Britain has made it through the Brexit movement, has made it very clear that they are against what's getting ready to happen in May of this year, and that is that 192 nations are going to meet behind closed doors, and they're going to decide whether or not they're going to ratify the agreement to have the WHO, the World Health Organization, taking the sovereignty out of the hands of the elected officials, and the WHO will be able to declare a pandemic in response to it and bypass the elected officials who won't have the political gall to go against the voters, because then the voters can target them and so on and so forth. So take it out of their hands and have a super sovereignty above your elected officials. And they're going to decide, that's what they're going to be doing in May of this year, where they're going to decide whether or not to give that authority to have the pandemic, the plan for pandemics to be declared to response to it by an organization above the sovereignty of the 192 countries. Do you want to have that kind of power in non-elected officials of those various countries? That's what they're talking about doing. They're not going to put that on national television, but that's what the talk is about, and they're getting ready to bring that about. The framers were too prescient and in the moment about how power operates to just give a single way in order to bring about a change in the document if it needs to be amended, not to make it less difficult to amend it. And you can tell it's difficult by the fact it's only been amended 18 times, because the first 10 amendments were added as a single bill of what they call the Bill of Rights. That's also problematical to me. They have it called that, but anyway, the first 10 amendments were added in 1791. So all of them, the first 10 amendments were added at the same time. They were ratified as a singular vote. So it's been ratified 18 times, because if you have 27 amendments and the first 10 are there, then it means 17 more times has been amended, so that each of the 17 amendments ratified singularly and so on, added to the Constitution at later times. And you'll have, for example, the 11th Amendment, since the first 10 are added at one time, the 11th Amendment added to the Constitution in 18, don't tell me, 18, let's see, 1812, 1811, 1812. And it wasn't amended again until after in the aftermath of the so-called Civil War. So the document has stood as written by the framers. But let me say this. Just because you place additions in the Constitution, and it becomes, and because it went through the process explained in provision 5, Article 5, just because it went through the tests for ratification, it does not mean that because it's placed in the document, that is this the placement in the document makes it a constitutional amendment. I mean, we're not talking about geography here. You scholars, what do y'all think about that? Not that you see, I know you don't go along with that. I tell you what you better not do. You better not you better not publicly vocalize your disagreement and come out in public, come out of hiding is where you are, and state otherwise, to do a post correction of the correction that I'm making here, because there are some things in the Constitution that are added through the amendment process that are unconstitutional, although they've been added to the document. And I would say then that applies to the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and the Section 3 that everybody's now clamoring about. And this Jack Smith, this rogue prosecutor, who has one agenda in mind at this point, and that's to get Trump. And I'm going to straighten that out too before this program is over today, because I'm going to talk about the Constitution and what's required here. And not that Jack Smith is trying to follow into this, because this man is a renegade. This man is This man is a loose cannon out here.
I heard that. I just saw on the before starting the show today that in a
Mhm.
blurb that Trump's lawyers have actually set, try to bring charges against Jack Smith for for violations and stuff like that, for contempt of court.
Yes.
Contempt of court. So, and I'd like to see where that goes. I don't think that's going to go anywhere.
Yeah, that won't go anywhere. But Jack Smith belongs in jail and so does Letitia James, so does Alvin Bragg, and this judge that's over that court case in New York, the one that has ruled in Letitia James's favor, that Donald Trump has feathered the nest egg of his own real estate by claiming that their claim is that he's made obtained a certain number of loans above the value of his property. He was leveraging his property to get loans, and he was accelerating the value of his property in order to get favorable loans from the banks and so on. And they wanted to claim that that was injurious, although you probably are aware the bankers went there and testified in Donald Trump's behalf. Why? Because they got their money back, and the interest that was accrued on the loan, they got that back, and so they're happy that they were able to make a loan and make a profit off the loan they made. They have no argument with Donald Trump. It's Letitia James, a new real estate broker. Can you imagine this? The people in law are now in the practice of real estate. That's how much they want this man out of here.
I think I saw too. Stephanopoulos, I guess the caption was on the thing of when he's Nancy Pelosi basically wants to ignore the Constitution and go after Trump, and basically just go after him. I guess even Stephanopoulos, who is a limp spine or no spine, he was even taken back, I guess, according to the the headline. So I was like, wow.
One of the benefits of Donald Trump running in 2016 was that he brought this temperament that was bubbling underneath the surface and guiding the country, but beneath the radar of the American people, but flying right underneath the antenna of the voters who didn't see that there was a certain guiding going on. Donald Trump has brought that out into the forefront. And I hear people saying things like this. They're saying that they're not living in the country that they were born in. Yes, you're living in the country you were born in. Here's the problem. You think you were born in the country they put on television. See, the imagery has been changed. The country hasn't changed. The imagery has been changed. You didn't have people, these perverts reading these stories in these classrooms to these children. You were raised on My Three Sons, Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best, Superman, and then the cowboy pictures where the good guys in 30 minutes had rid the town of the bad guys and all of that. And that was the America that was on TV. And then what was happening here was being downplayed because this was in your living room every day, these wholesome programs. I have no problem with that, but that's not reality. That wasn't the way the country actually operated. And people thought that was that Lassie came on Sundays, right? Remember that? And you had the Ren 1010, F Troop, and you just saw a lot of programs that painted a picture of America. Oz and Harriet was never, that family had a lot of problems in it. You would never know about what they put on TV. Ricky Nelson, that was a sex symbol on TV. Not that he was shaking his hips, but his songs at the end of that program didn't fit into anything the program was doing. It was just to give him something to do in that family. His singing at the end of that program was just something stuck in there in a way to keep him out of trouble and so on and so forth. But the family was a wholesome family, and I was watching it. My Little Margie was another program. I'm talking about some of the things that would have shaped the way we looked at the country, and people think that was America. America is the America you're looking at now. That was the same America back in that time period. Don't forget that was the America being that was written about by in this book that came out in 2012, was it? 2006, somewhere around there, written by David Ochinsky, called a Conspiracy So Immense, IMMENSE, a conspiracy so vast is what it's saying. And what they're talking about, what Ochinsky is talking about, is the things that McCarthy, Joseph McCarthy, I know you don't like him because he was excoriated and tarred and feathered in a sense in the media by Monroe, who was the forerunner to the great commentator Mike Wallace. Don't get it mixed up with his son Chris Wallace. No comparison, not in the same league, nowhere close to being congruent in their outlook, any of that. Chris Wallace is a disaster waiting to happen, and it happened away from Fox. Once he left Fox, everybody turned him off. He thought it was him. He left the station, and nobody followed him over there. Sick of him, glad he was gone. Glad you're gone because you stayed too long. That's what we used to say coming up. But Mike Wallace, a great down the middle of the road commentator. It seemed like he leaned a little bit right of center, but he was not over there to the left for sure. He was not like over there that cartoonist over there, who was a cartoonist for the Washington Post, who wrote under her block. He signed his name, her block. Very liberal on this liberal newspaper, the Washington Post. No, I'm talking about how our imagery from the people that Vance Packard wrote about in 1957 in Vance Packard's book called The Hidden Persuaders. Have you read that book? Go and read it if you haven't. The Hidden Persuaders, where they had the hidden persuaders that was in fact guiding the public to see the country in a different way. And people think the country has changed. No, the imagery has changed. And if you read David Ochinsky's book, you'll see that while they were putting My Little Marge and Oz and Harriet and Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, and all those other programs on TV, there was the America operating in real time that person would turn their away from because that wasn't on television. And what they found out, quite frankly, is that if you want to position the people to move in a certain direction, put it on TV, and that becomes their reality. Particularly those that can't turn the TV set off. And that's a whole lot of folks. Blacks, for example, watch 43% more television than whites do in this country. And that's why blacks are more brainwashed in this country than whites are in this country. That's how they can turn them on and turn them off and get them to burn Minneapolis down by telling them George Floyd had wings and flew off to heaven once he had died from what was a drug induced coma, and the man died from the fentanyl in his system, and they got this idea that Derek Chauvin killed this man. This total nonsense through which the media projected that, and they got the reaction they wanted. People burned Minneapolis down. Go look at the tape over a lie. But they found out if they put it on TV, they can get the reaction they want. They already knew what the reaction was going to be. People going to run out there and start burning, throwing fire on the city. And they stood back and allowed it to happen, and they don't realize that they are positioning everybody in the country toward what? A police state. That's what they're doing. At least Donald Trump has brought that out of the woodwork. Now, I'm making a claim here that nobody else is making, and that is that just because you've gone through the amendment process that's spelled out in the 5th article of the Constitution, and you went through the procedures laid out therein, it does not mean because you followed the procedure that added it to the Constitution, that it becomes constitutional as a result of that. Because there's another requirement that nobody's talking about. And that requirement is what I wrote about today in my post on Facebook. And that requirement is original intent. That you cannot amend the document so that the document through the amendment process cease to exist for the purpose for which it was created. The 16th Amendment is added to the Constitution in 1913, but what it canceled was Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution that forbids direct taxation by the federal government. It doesn't forbid it for the states, but it forbids it to that which the states created. The states told the federal government it cannot engage in direct taxation. The 16th Amendment jumps over the Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 provision and, in a sense, repeals it or leapfrogs over it, cancels it out, so now the federal government can put in a taxation. Problem here. The problem is that the framers understood the check and balance system, and they put it in the totality of the document. I know what they teach in the schools. I taught in the schools myself, and I know what they're teaching in the schools. I taught in the social studies department, and I worked underneath a chairperson of that department for years and years and years. And the chairperson taught government on the exit of the senior class and so on and so forth. And I had some, they took me out of the exit class because what was happening there is that if they did not, because the standard for me was that if you're a senior and you think you've already got your diploma, you got a problem here. The government class required for graduation, and I didn't mind failing students at the end of the 12-year process if they did not, in fact, come up to the level of scholarship they should have had at that point, because the 12th graders should be more prepared than the 9th graders were. And that's why the government class was an exit class at the end of it, and so on and so forth. They took me out of there and put me in the 11th grade class because I was failing to fail anybody is a problem, because people won't take diploma now. The children get ready to graduate, and when you fail them, you got a problem, because they want to get that robe and march down that aisle, and I want them to do that also, but I want them to be there because they earned it. I didn't want them doing what Claudine Gay did at Harvard University, where she plagiarized her her PhD and kept plagiarizing in terms of writing these scholarly papers, which was not her own writing, but stealing a lot of it from Carol Swain, who was tenured professor on two different occasions. One of which was she was tenured at Princeton, and she became tenured again at Vanderbilt. And for Claudine Gay to have lifted her work and repeatedly lifted her work and claimed it as her own without citation, that's a no-no in anybody's institution of higher learning. And Harvard's supposed to be the top university in the country, and you don't get fired for having done that. It exposed Harvard University, which I've been exposed to them as well by challenging with these persons in the legal arena. I've been challenging them from Harvard and what they're saying about the Constitution. I've been calling their names out, and I can't get them to say anything publicly because they're not here. They're not on this level.
Yeah, I remember when I was in, I was around the institution of higher education most of my adult life. And I remember that was considered the major sin is plagiarism, because all you got to do is you can just quote, the entire passage and then make back your point and just give credit for it. Basically, all that's all research is refining something somebody else has written and build on that, your case, or enhance or augment your case. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But you just got to simply acknowledge your source.
That's right.
It. So I don't know why it's so difficult.
No scholar should ever be credited for work that the scholar did not do. You cannot engage. This is a major sin in academia because it is literary theft. You see, what we are engaged in at the university is the politics of the mind, M-I-N-D. You're dealing with you're stealing from a person's mind. You're taking away the very personality and placing it inside of your writing as if that is your man that is talking on paper. Professors talk on paper. They're not getting tenure because they're in the classroom. That's for the surrogates to do. Teaching in the classroom. They're there to write. They're there to give to each other the life of the man, their man, in their writing. And what they really are doing is scholars are talking to other scholars. Nobody reading that stuff they're writing.
That's more egregious in a country in which our Constitution, from the onset, enshrining what we call intellectual property rights to allow the creation of the patent office.
That's right.
So it's even more
So
egregious what happened to American universities.
Yeah, that's why you patent, because if you don't protect the copyright or the patent, so to speak, of another person's intellectual work, why should there be any creativity? If you can just steal it, then it starts there and it stops there. Nobody has any incentive to be creative because the other person didn't put the work in and lift the work up, take credit for it, and all of a sudden his name is on it. The universities say no to that. Look what Harvard did. Harvard's been exposed. And Trump has done the same thing in the political world in terms of what Trump has done to come along to expose that the system is not what it is set up to be by the public glare in place upon those TV programs acting like that's America. McCarthy pointed out what was going on with America. You cannot come today and tell me that you want to return to the country of your birth. What land space are you talking about you were born in? People write on Facebook, I want my country back. You have your country. The old gray mare, M-A-R-E, the old gray mare is not what she has pretended to be. You have your country. Your country hasn't gone anywhere. What you want back are the illusions of the country. What you're looking at right now is a country unmasked. You're looking at who the Vance Packers hidden persuaders were. So Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 states that direct taxation, it forbids direct taxation by the federal government. And that's added to the Constitution in terms of the 5th article of the Constitution that's ratified in 1788 in the original document. That's not changed from 1788 until it gets to the election in 1912 of Woodrow Wilson. And during that progressive era, they're now going to come up and do what they had done before, amended by the way. They have done that before on occasion without anything added to the Constitution. They did it under Abraham Lincoln, where they were doing direct taxation during the so-called Civil War. All they did later on in 1913 was turn it into a constitutional mandate. And I'm contending here that the constitutional mandate was not constitutional, it was unconstitutional. Because you cannot amend the Constitution so that it ceases to do what it was created to do, and that's limit power. And one way you limit power, not just by the fact that you have each of 3/4 of the power, the state the federal legislative body, the federal judicial body, and the federal executive body checking on each other, you also limit the purse strings of the federal government. So it doesn't become the behemoth that it become in the aftermath of what occurred in 1913 when they added to the amendment number 16, and you now can get engaged in direct taxation through what I'm contending is an illegal addition to the Constitution. I'm contending with that, and I'm not asking for any scholar to go along with me on that. What I'm asking to do is debate it publicly, to disagree out in the open. Because I know people disagree with me from the kind of sentiment, the tension that I can feel when I go into certain places, and I know there's a certain amount of tension there. I was with some folks last night at a coffee place, and I can hear the sentiment, but they don't do that in public. That's an unconstitutional act added to the Constitution. So is the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment allows for the selection of the senators in the same way in which they're elected by in the House of Representatives, without taking into consideration that the members in the House are elected differently than the senators because the roles assigned to each of them is different in the document. The House of Representatives tried this on January the 6th, all you January the 6th nuts, of which Jack Smith is one of them. The people walking around in the people's house and getting arrested because of it. And they're trying to act as if they were out in the house, tearing the house up. Show the tapes, Mike Thomas. Show the videos. If that were the case, they would have shown it by now. And the mere fact that you only had at this point 96 hours of those 40,000 hours of tape show you that they realize they got a problem here. They don't want the American people to see what really happened on that date. They want to show them the outside, where I hope you looked at Clay Higgins when Tucker Carlson, the great Tucker Carlson, the greatest voice in the news industry today. Tucker Carlson is the greatest voice in the news media today. the most dynamic person that's out there in the news, reporting and through commentary, who's been freed from the restraints by being fired, basically where he's gone. Because they're saying he's a loose cannon, but he's not a loose cannon. What it is that he's a person that does not confine himself to being the person reading off teleprompter. The man is a thinker, and he refuses to let the teleprompter tell him through which they're doing that. You don't know they're actually reading from a teleprompter on that set. You know, as they turn this way and the camera is seems like they're just kind of able. You got a teleprompter that's there right in front of the camera, and they're reading from a teleprompter in large print. And Carson is not that kind of a person. A lot of his, what you see with Tucker Carlson, why he's so attractive as a commentator, is because a lot of what he talks about, it has a certain amount of spontaneity to it. Plus, in the script he's reading that he's responding to, he wrote the script himself, and that's why the man is so powerful. They know what this man is. This is not these guys on MSNBC, NBC, CNN, and Fox, and even my favorite station, which is Newsmax, which that became my favorite after I turned Fox off. I've watched a couple of programs on Fox, but that's it. It got too liberal for me, and I just couldn't accommodate them. But I'm telling you that the 16th Amendment is an amendment added to the document that, although added and placed in the document, is unconstitutionally placed in the document of the United States, the governing document, because you cannot pass that document, amend that document, so that it's amended so as to create what amounts to a certain amount of self-efficaciousness, where the document begins to self-annihilate. It's to self-annihilate itself. You cannot add, if you notice a document, you cannot amend a document so the document is amended so it ceases to exist. You can't do that. And if you notice what they did with the articles, what they did there, they realized that it was just impossible to amend it, because to amend it the way it had to be amended to make it effective would be to amend it out of existence. So they just threw it out and put another document in its place. They went to Philadelphia to do that. The 17th Amendment was the way in which you were to select the senators, because the senators were to represent the states. And those were to be the state representatives. So the people had the representatives in the House, and the state representatives were in the Senate. And they were given a larger number of years to serve than the president of the United States were, because the states were over the federal government, had in fact created it. And the federal government therefore intended to be subordinate to it. To then make the senators elected the same way as the members of the House is an abrogation of that particular intent, the original intent of the document, even in that regard. And then lastly, the third section of Amendment 14. Finally, let me say this. The reason why Section 3, all you scholars, is unconstitutional is because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment abrogates the right of the people to choose the elected officials. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution guarantees to each state, states it in the document, it guarantees each state a Republican form of government. And in a Republican form of government, where it is in fact different from a democracy, is that democracy is a majority voice without any restraints. What the majority says rules. And if the 51% say this, the 49% are therefore under the need of the numbers. Therefore, they're tyrannically to follow the instructions handed down to them against their will by the 51%. But in a Republican form of government, you can have a majority voice, but it must be, in fact, guided by the restraints upon the majority, placed by the fact that the Republican form of government puts restraints upon the majority. No restraints in democracy upon the majority, but in the Republican form of government, restraints upon the majority. That's the difference between the two. And that's why they keep trying to tell us that they keep saying our democracy. Get out of here with that. It's not even mentioned one time in the Constitution, not in the Bill of Rights, quote unquote, and not in the Declaration of Independence, not intended by the framers. The original intent is obvious. Anything that abrogates the original intent, that abrogation makes it unconstitutional and should not be added to the document. I'm saying it. There's no scholar qualified to say otherwise. And all you scholars that disagree with me, bring it. Okay, that's nothing more than for one day, but to get ready for the football game, we're taking it tonight. We're taking it to Washington, number 2 team, and we are favored by 4 points. I don't think it'll be that close, but we'll see. But everybody is electric in the state of Michigan. We're all looking forward to it. Let's go, U of M. Let's go blue. Okay, we're out of here until next week. Once you follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.